Have you ever wondered why the most qualified people rarely end up leading countries? Why does it feel like we keep electing leaders who promise everything and deliver nothing? Why do experts get ignored while confident blowhards rise to the top? Here's something that'll blow your mind. In 2005, researchers at Princeton ran an experiment that should terrify anyone who votes. They showed people photographs of political candidates from foreign elections. Just faces, no names, no policies, no context. The participants had never heard of these politicians or their countries. They saw each face for exactly 1 second. Then researchers asked one simple question. Who do you think won the election? The participants guessed correctly about 70% of the time, based purely on facial features. 1 second, judgments about competence based on jaw width and facial symmetry predicted real election outcomes with terrifying accuracy. Then, in 2009, Swiss researchers did something even more disturbing. They ran a similar experiment with children aged 5 to 13. They showed kids pairs of adult faces and asked, "Who would you want as captain of your boat?" They weren't told these were politicians. They didn't know it was an election prediction task. They were just picking faces. The children predicted French parliamentary election winners at rates statistically identical to adults. Let that sink in. We're choosing who controls nuclear weapons, economies, and millions of lives using the same instant facial judgments as a kindergartner deciding which adult looks friendlier. And this isn't some modern problem caused by social media or 24-hour news cycles. A Greek philosopher named Plato watched this exact pattern, charisma triumphing over competence, destroy the world's first democracy over 2,300 years ago. He wrote it all down. He explained exactly how and why democracy would keep rewarding the worst possible leaders. Nobody listened then. Judging by how we still run elections today, nobody's listening now. Plato didn't criticize democracy because he was some elitist snob who hated common people. He lived through the collapse. He watched Athens make catastrophically stupid decision after catastrophically stupid decision because charismatic speakers convinced crowds to vote against their own interests. He watched them execute Socrates, his mentor, a man whose only crime was asking uncomfortable questions because he made powerful people look foolish. Plato grew up in the shadow of Athens' greatest military disaster, the Sicilian expedition, where over 40,000 Athenian soldiers and allies died in a doomed invasion sold to the public by a charismatic general named Alcibiades, who promised easy conquest and vast riches. The expedition was a catastrophe born from beautiful speeches and wishful thinking. After witnessing democracy fail in the most predictable, avoidable ways, Plato laid out a warning that's been sitting in libraries for 24 centuries while we keep repeating the same mistakes. So let's talk about why democracy keeps handing power to people who excel at winning votes but fail at governing, why our brains are wired to choose the wrong leaders, and why the system itself creates this disaster. Plato told a story that explains everything. Imagine you're about to cross a dangerous ocean. The ship's owner is rich, but knows nothing about sailing. The crew starts arguing about who should captain the vessel. One guy steps forward. He's never navigated before, but he doesn't know enough about navigation to realize he's unqualified. He's confident, not because he's competent, but because he's never encountered the complexity that would make him humble. He tells everyone exactly what they want to hear. The seas will be calm. The journey will be quick. Everyone will get rich. He believes this, not because it's true, but because he genuinely doesn't understand what he doesn't know. Meanwhile, there's an actual experienced navigator standing in the corner. He's trying to explain that storms are coming, the route is dangerous, they need to prepare for difficulties. But he sounds uncertain because he actually understands the complexities. He talks about contingencies, backup plans, things that could go wrong. The crew votes. They choose the confident amateur over the cautious expert because confidence feels better than competence. They mistake certainty for knowledge. They confuse a good speech for good seamanship. The ship sinks. This wasn't a cute metaphor for Plato. This was Athens. The ship was the state. The crew was the voters. And he watched them choose charismatic amateurs over qualified experts again and again until the whole thing collapsed. And we're still doing it. September 1960. the first televised presidential debate in American history. Richard Nixon versus John F. Kennedy. On radio, listeners thought Nixon won, but on television, Kennedy dominated. Why? Nixon looked pale, sweaty, uncomfortable. Kennedy was tan, rested, telegenic. He looked presidential. People who watched on TV overwhelmingly picked Kennedy as the winner of the same debate that radio listeners thought Nixon won. The same words, the same arguments, different medium, different winner. Appearance changed everything. Or take Brexit in 2016. The Leave campaign had 3 words plastered on buses: take back control. The Remain campaign had economists, detailed reports about trade consequences, complex analyses of economic integration. The simple story beat the complicated truth. Voters admitted afterward they didn't fully understand the economic implications. But take back control felt right. This pattern isn't unique to one country or political ideology. From Italy to the Philippines, from the UK to the United States, the same dynamic plays out. Charismatic simplicity beats knowledgeable complexity. Every single time. Here's the question Plato forces us to confront. Why do we treat leading a nation as the one job that requires 0 qualifications? We demand that doctors study for over a decade before touching a patient. We require pilots to log thousands of hours before flying commercial aircraft. We need licenses to cut hair, drive cars, sell real estate. But running a country and making decisions that affect millions of lives? Just be popular enough to win a vote. No experience required, no competency test, no demonstration of actual knowledge. Plato had a name for the people who thrive in democratic systems: sophists. These were masters of persuasion who cared more about winning arguments than finding truth. They could argue any side of any position with equal conviction as long as it got them power, money, or influence. Now here's what made them dangerous. They weren't stupid people. Many were intellectually capable, even brilliant in certain areas. But when it came to governance, understanding economics, ethics, justice, the long-term consequences of policy, they were operating completely outside their expertise. Yet their skill at rhetoric made them appear qualified. They knew how to sound wise without being wise. They knew how to project authority without possessing knowledge. To Plato, this was the most dangerous combination: intelligence without wisdom, confidence without competence, persuasive skill without genuine expertise. These people didn't know what they didn't know. They'd mastered the appearance of knowledge without acquiring actual understanding. They could convince crowds they understood economics without understanding economics. They could project expertise in governance while being catastrophically ignorant of how states actually function. Think about what this means for democracy. The system doesn't select for people who understand governance, it selects for people who can win popularity contests. And winning a popularity contest requires a completely different skill set than running a country. What skills does a democratic election reward? Public speaking, charisma, the ability to simplify complex issues into memorable slogans, looking good on camera, projecting confidence, making people feel good. These are legitimate skills, just not the ones you need to govern effectively. The skills needed for governing: understanding economic systems, navigating complex foreign policy, managing massive bureaucracies, making difficult trade-offs between competing values, acknowledging uncertainty, accepting that some problems have no good solutions, only less bad ones. Say any of that in a campaign and you lose to someone promising simple fixes. So democracy creates a systematic mismatch. It elevates people who are brilliant at campaigning and often incompetent at governing. Not because they're generally stupid, but because they've spent their lives developing the wrong expertise.